a canine German Shepherd waited 5 years on the same road. Then, one morning, a miracle happened. A retired canine German Shepherd stood by the roadside for 5 long years, refusing to leave. Through rain, snow, and scorching summers, he never moved. People in the small town whispered stories about him. Some called it loyalty, others called it heartbreak. But what no one expected was what happened one fateful morning. A miracle that would change everything. Stay with us until the end, because this story will move you to tears. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss more powerful stories like this one. The sun was just beginning to rise over the small town of Willow Creek, casting long golden shadows over the nearly deserted highway. For most, it was just another quiet morning. But for one solitary figure, the day was no different from the thousands that had come before. By the side of Highway 16, a German Shepherd sat, his amber eyes scanning the horizon. His coat, once sleek and strong, was now dusted with dirt, and his ribs pressed slightly against his skin. Yet, despite the wear of time, his posture remained proud. The townspeople called him Ghost. For 5 long years, he had waited, always at the same spot, never straying too far. No one knew exactly what kept him there, but they had their theories. Some said he was waiting for a master who would never return. Others believed he had simply forgotten how to leave. But those who had been in Willow Creek long enough knew the real story. Ghost wasn't just any dog. He had once been an elite canine police officer assigned to Deputy Mark Evans. Together, they had patrolled the streets, chased down criminals, and protected the people of this town. Ghost had been more than just a dog. He had been a hero. Then came that tragic night. It had been a routine call, a suspected burglary on the outskirts of town. Mark and Ghost had responded immediately, sirens cutting through the still night air. But they never made it. Somewhere along Highway 16, Mark's patrol car skidded off the road and flipped into a ditch. The first responders arrived too late. Mark Evans was gone. And Ghost survived. But from that night on, he never left the side of that road. 5 years passed. Seasons changed. People moved in and out of town. But Ghost remained, a living shadow of the past. Some good-hearted folks had tried to help. A local mechanic named Joe Benson often left food near an abandoned gas station as close to where Ghost sat. Others had tried to coax him into their homes, offering warmth and safety. But every time Ghost would slip away, returning to his waiting place like clockwork. Nothing could move him. Until that morning. A dusty Ford pickup truck rumbled down the road and slowed to a stop near Ghost's spot. The door creaked open and a man stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. He was tall, with graying hair and a weathered face. Daniel Carter, a retired veteran passing through town. Daniel had heard the stories, but seeing the dog in person was different. There was something in Ghost's eyes, something more than just sadness. It was determination, a silent promise. Kneeling down, Daniel extended a hand. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "What are you still doing out here?" Ghost didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him at all. Daniel sighed, reaching into his pocket for a sandwich he had packed for the road. "Hungry?" He tore off a piece of ham and tossed it toward Ghost. Nothing. The dog didn't even glance at it. Daniel frowned. He had seen this kind of loyalty before. He had lived it. He turned to the gas station across the road, where an old man, Frank Harris, was watching from his truck. Daniel called out, "That dog really been out here this whole time?" Frank nodded. 5 years, since Mark died. That was his partner, you know, K9 unit. Daniel's stomach tightened. A partner still waiting. He looked back at Ghost, feeling something stir deep inside him. The dog didn't need pity. He needed something else. Someone who understood. For the first time in 5 years, Ghost lifted his head and looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Something changed. The miracle had begun. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Daniel Carter, it felt like time had stopped. Ghost, the legendary canine German Shepherd, who had waited 5 years for someone who would never return, had just looked directly at him. Not just a glance, an acknowledgement. Daniel swallowed hard, unsettled by the intensity in the dog's amber eyes. He had seen loyalty before, had lived through it in his own military days. But this was something else. Ghost wasn't lost. He wasn't abandoned. He was waiting. A low sigh escaped Daniel's lips as he sat back on the gravel. I get it, buddy. I really do. Ghost didn't move, but his ears flicked ever so slightly at the sound of Daniel's voice. From across the road, Frank Harris, the old man from the gas station, watched the interaction with interest. He had seen plenty of travelers stop and try to reach Ghost, but none had succeeded. The dog was untouchable, but this time, something was different. Frank got out of his truck and ambled over. You got away with dogs, son? Daniel shook his head. Not really. Just understand them, I guess. Frank glanced down at Ghost, who was still staring at Daniel. Well, I'll be damned. He spat into the dirt. That's the first time I've seen him acknowledge anyone in 5 years. Daniel's gaze remained on Ghost. 5 years. 5 winters. 5 summers. 5 years of watching the world move on while he stayed frozen in time, waiting for someone who would never return. Daniel had seen this before. Soldiers who had lost their brothers in combat, refusing to move on. Stuck in that one moment. And now, this dog. A soldier, still on duty. Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair. What happens to him when he gets too old to wait? Frank sighed. Don't know. He's already outlasted most dogs his age. But one day he won't be here no more. Just like Mark. The weight of those words settled heavily in Daniel's chest. He looked down at Ghost. The canine's sharp, intelligent eyes locked onto him as if he could sense Daniel's thoughts. Finally, Daniel made a decision. He wasn't leaving. Not tonight. That evening, Daniel parked his truck near the old gas station, within sight of Ghost's usual spot. Most nights, the dog never slept near humans. He had made a bed of dirt and dried grass by the side of the road, curled up alone under the open sky. But tonight, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew cool, Ghost didn't move away. Instead, he sat, watching, waiting. Daniel, sitting in his truck bed with a thermos of coffee, simply observed him. He wasn't trying to rescue Ghost. He wasn't trying to make him leave. He was just there. Hours passed. The sounds of crickets and distant train horns filled the night air. Then, at some point after midnight, something happened that no one in Willow Creek had seen in 5 years. Ghost moved. Not far, not much, but enough. Instead of curling up in his usual place by the road, he took a step closer to Daniel, then another. Daniel didn't react, didn't move, didn't break the fragile moment. Ghost finally settled down just a few feet away. The first sign of trust. Daniel exhaled slowly, barely believing what he was seeing. A miracle wasn't always sudden. It was something that happened one small step at a time. As the night stretched on, Daniel found himself speaking into the quiet. I lost people too, you know. People I waited for. People who never came back. Ghost didn't react, but Daniel knew he was listening. It never gets easier. You just keep going, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. The wind rustled through the trees. The road was silent, empty. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Ghost was still there, waiting, watching. But this time, he wasn't waiting alone. The morning sun painted Willow Creek in golden hues, stretching over the quiet highway. Daniel Carter awoke in the back of his truck, stiff from the night air, the smell of coffee still lingering in his thermos. For a moment, he wasn't sure if what had happened last night was real. Then he turned his head. Just a few feet away, Ghost still lay curled in the dirt, his body relaxed, but his amber eyes open. Watching. Daniel exhaled slowly. It wasn't a dream. The dog had actually moved closer. After 5 years of rejection, of pushing away anyone who tried to help him, Ghost had let him in. It was a small step, but to Daniel, it meant everything. He sat up carefully, stretching his arms. "Morning, partner." Ghost's ears twitched at the word, a flicker of recognition. Daniel reached into his bag, pulling out a pack of jerky. He unwrapped a piece and tossed it lightly toward the German Shepherd. Ghost's eyes locked onto it. A test. Would he accept food from a stranger? A long pinch. The highway remained silent, the town still waking up. Then, with deliberate slowness, Ghost sniffed the jerky and ate it. Daniel grinned. The first real breakthrough. A few minutes later, the sound of tires crunching against gravel broke the moment. Daniel turned his head to see Frank Harris's old truck rolling up. The gas station owner had probably been watching from afar again, curious about how things were unfolding. The old man stepped out, hands on his hips, his weathered face full of skepticism. "Huh." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you, too." Frank jerked his chin toward Ghost. "That dog just took food from your hand?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah. First time?" Frank let out a low whistle. "First time in 5 damn years." He walked closer, eyeing Ghost like he was seeing something impossible. The dog, however, didn't react. Not in fear, not in aggression. He just stayed. Frank crossed his arms. "So, what's your plan, stranger?" Daniel looked back at Ghost. What was his plan? He hadn't come here expecting to rescue a dog. He was just passing through, stopping in town for gas, heading nowhere in particular. But now, he wasn't sure if he could leave. He scratched his jaw. "I don't know yet, but I don't think he's supposed to be alone anymore." Frank studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You ever trained dogs before?" Daniel shook his head. "Not professionally, but I've worked with dogs in the military. I know how to read them." Frank nodded, glancing at Ghost one more time. "Well, I'll tell you this. If anyone's got a shot at reaching that dog, it's you." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because deep down, he already knew. That afternoon, Daniel decided to test the next step. He walked across the road, giving Ghost a little space, then slowly patted the truck bed. "Come on, boy, let's take a ride." Ghost lifted his head. He knew what that meant. A truck, a patrol vehicle, a command from a partner. Daniel held his breath, not expecting much. But to his astonishment, Ghost stood up. Frank, who had been watching from his truck, nearly dropped his coffee. "No way." Ghost didn't jump in, not yet, but he took a step closer. He was thinking about it. That was enough. Daniel smiled. "That's all right, partner. No rush. I'll wait." Because Ghost had waited for 5 years, now it was Daniel's turn to wait for him. The golden hues of the afternoon sky painted Highway 16 in soft light as Daniel sat on the edge of his truck bed, watching Ghost with patience. The K9 German Shepherd had taken a step forward, but he wasn't ready to jump in just yet. And Daniel understood. Trust wasn't built in a day. So he stayed. He let the moment settle, let Ghost process what was happening. The dog had spent 5 years rejecting help, resisting change. One step forward was already a victory. "It's all right, partner," Daniel said softly. "We do this at your pace." Ghost tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words. But then, just as quickly, he turned away, retreating back to his usual spot on the roadside. Daniel sighed, but didn't push. He knew better than to force it. Behind him, Frank Harris leaned against his truck, watching. "You know," the old man started, "I think that dog's more stubborn than you." Daniel chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first time I've dealt with stubborn." Frank sipped his coffee, his gaze drifting toward Ghost. "You stick around long enough, you just might be the one to break through." Daniel glanced at the dog, then back at Frank. "I think I already did." Frank's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Daniel nodded. "He took food from me this morning." Frank nearly choked on his coffee. "You're joking." "Not even a little." For the first time, Frank's face softened with something close to admiration. "Well, damn! If that ain't something." That night, Daniel did exactly what he had done before. He parked his truck near the gas station, close enough to see Ghost's spot but far enough to give the dog his space. He unrolled a blanket in the truck bed, laid back, and watched the stars above. The town of Willow Creek was small, quiet. The kind of place where people didn't rush. Maybe that's why Ghost had been able to wait so long. Daniel wasn't sure when he drifted off, but a sound, a soft shuffle of paws against gravel, stirred him from sleep. He kept his eyes closed, heart pounding. Then he felt it, the warmth of fur. His breath hitched, but he didn't move. Ghost wasn't curled up beside him, but he was closer than ever before, just a few feet away. Lying down, watching. Daniel swallowed hard. He had gained Ghost's trust. Not fully, not completely. But enough. Enough for Ghost to let him stay. For the first time in 5 years, Ghost wasn't waiting alone. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He grabbed his bag and walked toward Ghost's spot, this time with purpose. The dog lifted his head, ears perking up in attention. Daniel patted the truck bed. "What do you say, partner? One ride? No tricks." Ghost stared at him. Seconds passed. Then, in the most unexpected, miraculous moment, Ghost stood up. Frank, watching from his truck, muttered under his breath, "No way!" Ghost took a slow step forward, then another, and finally, as if something deep inside him had finally shifted, he jumped into the truck. Daniel felt his heart pound. He didn't move too fast, didn't want to startle him. Instead, he just let the moment settle. Then, quietly, he climbed into the driver's seat and turned the engine on. As the truck rumbled to life, Ghost didn't move. For the first time in 5 years, he was ready to leave. The low rumble of the truck's engine hummed through the air. As Ghost sat in the truck bed, his body still, but his eyes scanning everything. Daniel kept his movements slow, careful not to spook the dog. This was the moment. For 5 years, Ghost had refused to leave this road. Now, as the truck idled, Daniel turned in his seat, meeting the shepherd's intense amber gaze. "You sure about this, partner?" Ghost didn't move, didn't jump out, didn't retreat. And that was all the answer Daniel needed. With a slow, steady motion, he shifted the truck into gear and pulled onto Highway 16. The road Ghost had never abandoned was finally behind him. The drive was quiet, the hum of the tires the only sound between them. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror every so often, half expecting Ghost to panic, to jump, to change his mind. But he didn't. Instead, the shepherd lay down, his head resting on his front paws. Daniel exhaled. That was trust. They drove for about 10 minutes, just long enough to put some distance between them and the place Ghost had called home for too long. Finally, Daniel pulled into a small clearing by the edge of a lake. He cut the engine and turned in his seat. "All right, buddy, no pressure. Just wanted to give you some fresh air." Ghost lifted his head, sniffing the air. The lake shimmered under the morning sun, the wind carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was peaceful. Slowly, Daniel got out of the truck. He didn't try to call Ghost, didn't coax him out. The dog had to decide for himself. Instead, Daniel walked to the water's edge, crouching down to scoop a handful of water in his palms. The cool liquid dripped between his fingers as he sighed. This place reminded him of home, the quiet, the stillness. Maybe Ghost felt it too. A few minutes passed before he heard it, the soft click of paws against the truck bed. Daniel didn't turn, didn't move. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. Ghost had jumped out. Not in fear, not in hesitation, but with purpose. The shepherd moved forward, sniffing the ground, assessing his surroundings. A canine always surveyed his new territory. Daniel smirked. "What do you think?" Ghost didn't answer, of course, but the way he didn't immediately retreat was enough. This wasn't the road, it wasn't the past, and for the first time in 5 years. Ghost was okay with that. A few minutes later, Daniel pulled a ball from his bag. It was an old habit. Whenever he met a dog, he carried something to test them. He held it up. "What do you say, partner? You still got it?" Ghost's ears twitched. His eyes locked onto the ball. Daniel didn't throw it. Not yet. He just held it. A test. A moment passed. Then, without warning, Ghost lunged. Fast, precise, like a trained canine officer. He snatched the ball from Daniel's grip, his jaws firm but controlled. Daniel froze. Then, slowly, he smiled. Ghost stood there, the ball in his mouth, tail still. Then, for the first time in years, his tail wagged. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "Attaboy." He reached forward, slowly, giving Ghost time to react. But the shepherd didn't move away, didn't flinch. For the first time, Daniel touched him. His fingers brushed against thick fur, rough from years of weather and dust. Ghost let him. Not just let him. He leaned into it. Daniel swallowed hard. This wasn't just a dog. This was a partner who had been waiting for someone to understand. That evening, Daniel made a decision. He sat by the fire he had built near the truck, Ghost lying just a few feet away. The shepherd had eaten. He had accepted touch. And now, he was sleeping. A deep, peaceful sleep. Daniel exhaled. "Guess we're both strays, huh?" Ghost's ear twitched in his sleep. Daniel chuckled. Then, looking up at the sky, he made a silent promise. "You don't have to wait anymore, partner. You're not alone." And for the first time in 5 years, neither was Ghost. The crackling fire flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows over the small lakeside clearing. Ghost lay nearby, his body stretched out, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For the first time in 5 years, the shepherd slept deeply, without the restless vigilance of a dog still waiting for someone who would never return. Daniel sat beside the flames, his back against the truck, staring into the embers. His fingers absent-mindedly turned a small metal tag between them, a K9 badge he had found on a chain near Ghost's usual waiting spot. It was worn down, scratched by time, but the letters were still readable. K9 Unit, Officer Ghost, Willow Creek PD. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. This dog wasn't just a stray. He wasn't just waiting. He had been mourning. 5 years. 5 years of loyalty to a man who would never return. Daniel exhaled, his fingers tightening around the tag. He had seen this kind of devotion before, in soldiers who had lost their brothers in war. Ghost had lost his. But now, maybe he was ready for something new. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the lake, mist rolling over the water's surface. Ghost stirred before Daniel did, stretching out his legs before shaking the dust from his coat. His ears twitched at the sound of birds in the distance, his instincts still razor sharp. Daniel sat up, watching him. "Morning, partner." Ghost soon turned his head toward him. He didn't wag his tail, but he didn't turn away either. Progress. Daniel grabbed a protein bar from his bag and unwrapped it, then reached for a chunk of jerky. He held it out. Ghost hesitated, but only for a second. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and took it from Daniel's hand. Daniel grinned. "You're starting to trust me, huh?" The shepherd chewed carefully, his amber eyes locked on Daniel. It wasn't just food. It was an agreement, a silent understanding. Ghost was no longer just tolerating Daniel's presence. He had accepted it. After packing up, Daniel decided it was time for the next test. Would Ghost follow him? He walked to the truck, opened the passenger door, and patted the seat. "What do you say? Right up front with me this time?" Ghost stood still, his body tense, as if fighting against something deeply ingrained. For 5 years, the only vehicle he had been in was the one where he had lost Mark. Daniel saw the hesitation in Ghost's eyes. He could almost feel the memories weighing him down. He didn't push. "You don't have to. Not today." He gestured toward the truck bed instead. "But the offer's open." Ghost considered him. Then, to Daniel's surprise, he jumped into the truck bed again, on his own. Daniel smiled. "Good enough for me." With that, they were back on the road. As the truck rumbled down the highway, Daniel found himself wondering, what now? He had never planned on staying in Willow Creek. It was just a stop on the way to nowhere. But now he had a dog who had spent 5 years refusing to move on, until him. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Ghost was sitting up, ears alert, watching the world pass by. Daniel smirked. "You got a plan, buddy? 'Cause I sure as hell don't." Ghost didn't react. But as the wind ruffled his fur, Daniel swore he saw it. The faintest hint of a wag in his tail. And that was enough. For now. A few hours later, they pulled into Willow Creek's police station. Daniel wasn't sure what had brought him there. Maybe Ghost deserved some kind of closure. Maybe Daniel did too. The station was small, just a single brick building with a few patrol cars parked outside. As soon as Daniel stepped out of the truck, Ghost went rigid. His ears pricked forward, his body stiffened. Daniel followed his gaze to the entrance. A man stood there, late 50s, uniform slightly wrinkled, eyes sharp as ever. Sheriff Tom Briggs. Daniel had never met him, but he recognized the type. Old-school lawman, the kind who had seen too much, lost too many. Briggs walked forward, his eyes flicking between Daniel and Ghost. "You got a hell of a dog there, son." Daniel patted the truck. "Not mine. Just keeping him company." Briggs exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "I never thought I'd see him leave that road." Ghost hadn't moved from his spot in the truck bed. He just stared at the building, as if waiting for something. Briggs sighed. "You know, we tried to take him in after Mark died. He wouldn't have it. We thought about forcing him, but..." His voice trailed off. Daniel nodded. "Some dogs aren't meant to be caged." Briggs studied him. "And you? What's your story?" Daniel smirked. "Just passing through." Briggs scoffed. "Yeah, sure you are." Daniel didn't argue, because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that was true anymore. That night, Daniel and Ghost parked outside a small motel on the edge of town. Daniel left the truck door open, giving Ghost the option to come inside. The dog hesitated. He had spent years under the open sky, but after a long moment, Ghost stepped inside. Not much, just a few steps, just enough. Daniel smiled. "Yeah, partner, I think we'll be all right." And for the first time in 5 years, Ghost wasn't just surviving, He was living. The motel room was small, dimly lit by a single bedside lamp. Ghost stood just inside the door, his paws hesitating on the worn carpet. For 5 years, he had only known the cold dirt of the roadside, the endless waiting. Now, for the first time, he had a choice. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. You don't have to stay, partner. But if you do, this is home now. Ghost's ears twitched, his amber eyes locked onto Daniel's. A long pause. Then, quietly, cautiously, he stepped forward. Not out of obedience, not out of habit, but out of trust. Daniel reached out a hand. This time, Ghost didn't hesitate. He pressed his head into Daniel's palm, exhaling deeply. And just like that, after 5 years of waiting, Ghost finally found where he belonged. Home.